Going to speaking to us on staying in the deep end, the art of courageous leadership. Now, you all have his bio, and I hope you look at it because it's amazing and fascinating. I'm only going to talk just about a few of the highlights. But Daron K. Roberts.
The other sword is a lot cooler.
Can we put your phones on mute? Thank you. I know that boy, actually. That's my son, Christian. I asked him to join. He's a junior at UT and is probably very embarrassed, but
Nice.
I'm glad to have Christian on board. Professor Daron K. Roberts is a former NFL and college football coach and the founding director of the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation at the University of Texas at Austin. He is also the best-selling author of a book called Call an Audible, Let My Pivot from Harvard Law to NFL Coach Inspire Your Transition, which was named as one of Sports Illustrated's best sports business books in 2017. He's a regular contributor to Forbes.com, and his writing has appeared in the Dallas Morning News, Fortune, the Houston Chronicle, Texas CEO Magazine, and Time, and actually I hear him periodically on the Texas Standard, so you might have heard him also on that radio program if you're a follower of NPR. He holds a bachelor's in Plan 2 honors in government from the University of Texas, and also worked as an aide to Senator Joe Lieberman before continuing his education at Harvard, where he earned a Master of Public Policy degree from the Kennedy School of Government, and then subsequently a Juris Doctor degree from Harvard Law in 2007. Harvard Kennedy School has recognized him as one of the 75 most fascinating alumni, and the World Economic Forum pegged Roberts as a young global leader. He is a Presidential Leadership Foundation member, which is a joint venture between Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush, and was part of the inaugural class of 60 members. So one thing I wanted to add is he's also really great to follow on LinkedIn and other social media, and I would encourage you to do that. It exhausts me, honestly, every day to see what he sets out to accomplish and actually does, but it's also a great motivation. I'm sure he'll talk more about his methods in doing that. So without further ado, please welcome me in having Daron K. Roberts speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for allowing me to enter this space. And so, one thing I want to say, just in this period of Zoom, I can only talk to so many avatars and muted videos for such a, for only a short period of time. So I'm gonna go briefly through this, and then I'm gonna want questions where I can see some human faces. So don't worry about your background or where you are. I'll tell you that my wife and I have 5 kids. I converted her closet into an office, and so such is life in the COVID world. So I'm a 5th generation East Texan. I was born and raised in Mount Pleasant. My dad took me to Carthage, Texas, which is where he and my mom grew up. He took me to the Walnut Grove Cemetery and showed me the headstone from my great-great-grandfather. My great-great-grandfather was Bill Roberts, and we have a census tract from the state of Texas in which it shows he owned 160 acres of land in 1870. So you don't have to be a historian to know that 1870 was merely 5 years from the end of the Civil War, and it's a great mystery in my family, and it will probably be one of the last books that I write, which will be my theory, or really 3 theories on how I believe that this black man 5 years out of slavery ends up with 160 acres of land in 5 years. So my dad showed me the map and he said, listen, this is why you will never have any excuses. I was too young to really know what my dad was talking about, but that sort of set the tone for the way that I approached education. My dad, Baptist minister, was also a soil scientist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. My mom, elementary school principal. So religion and education were the staples in my home. And in a town of 12,291 people, I felt pulled to find a way to make my mark in the world. And my dad forced me to do that relentlessly. And so I set a goal for myself to become governor of Texas by age 40. I turned 41 last year, so obviously I took a wrong turn somewhere, but that was the goal. I went to the University of Texas. I get there in 97. I was a part of the first post-Hopwood class. You if you probably encountered this somewhere in educational law, but the Hopwood decision, which our state's attorney general uh, overconstrued, misconstrued, misinterpreted, was a decision, or actually the interpretation of the decision severely hampered how Texas public universities could use race as a factor in its not just admissions, but from financial aid and other sort of vantage points. So I get to the University of Texas. I want to be governor. So in my mind, the path was this. This was back when I was in a very linear, if A then B, if B then C type of roadmap. So I said, okay, I'll go to UT. I'll be student body president. I will go to Harvard Law School. I will return back to my hometown. I'm sorry. I will work at a big law firm in Houston. I'll spend 5 years there. I'll go back to my hometown. I will run for some office and then slowly work my way up to the statewide office of governor. As you know, life is anything but linear. And so I took the non-linear path. I apply to Harvard Law School. I don't get accepted. I don't get rejected. I get waitlisted. So for those of you who've spent any time on a wait list, you know, the letter was something like, Dear Daron, we like you. Unfortunately, we like more people than we like you. In the unlikely event that all of those people tell us no and turn us down, we may reach back out to you. But if you have any viable options for law school, we highly advise you take them. You know, with love, Joyce P. Curl, Dean of Admissions. I was distraught. I went to the Kennedy School of Government. I'm sorry, let me back up. I worked for Joe Lieberman for 2 years. This is a job I didn't want to take. It was a job that my mentor arranged for me. And I get to the Senate in June of '01, think I should be in law school, right? It's sort of, I begrudgingly went to DC, but I'm there for September 11th. And I received an education in politics and crisis management and governance that I really could not have drawn up, right? I mean, it was one of those moments in time, and especially working in the Senate, where I got a chance to get a front row seat at the viewing of a government work through a crisis, which gives me an interesting perspective, I think, in watching how our leadership in this country is responding to COVID-19. I go to the Kennedy School. I keep reapplying. I get waitlisted 4 years in a row. Finally get into law school there my 4th year. I'm in the class of '07. So '04, I walk into my class. I'm going through the motions. The summer, the summer before my 3L year, I split clerkships between, let's see, who was it? It was, well, it's interesting, right? It's like back in '07 or '06, when we were a law student, I could have told you the rankings of all the firms and where they fall. And it's interesting to see, like, with some hindsight, it's not as important to me now. But I did clerk that summer. I split between V&E and Fulbright in Houston. And I had some time in between both because our semester started fairly late in the fall. A buddy asked me to go with him to a football camp at the University of South Carolina. So he was my buddy that I had played football with in high school. He was a coach in Pflugerville, Texas, just north of Austin. And he and I hadn't seen each other. And so he said, hey, ride with me to this camp. It'll be a good time. I go to the camp. I'm sitting in the back of the room. It's 2006. So I'm playing on my BlackBerry. And the head coach comes out and he says, one of our volunteer coaches didn't show up. Would anyone be willing to fill in for him? So I'm looking around. I'm like, I played high school football in Texas. I was a first team all district strong safety. One of the interesting things about my household, I'll just venture off here a little bit, was that my dad, I never saw him watch a football game or any sports contest on TV for more than a half. he always supported me in my sports ventures. But one thing that he told me at the age of 9 was to never overinvest my energies into a profession that required my knees to work properly in order to be compensated. I'm like, what in the heck is this guy talking about? That was his way of saying, look, sports, they're great. Unlike a lot of people around you who see sports as sort of this metaphor, this means of climbing the social scale, that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to do it through education. But I'm in the back of this room and I said, hey, I'll coach. He says, hey, coach, where are you from? I said, Mount Pleasant. He goes, what high school? I said, Mount Pleasant High School. So, all right, you have group 6. Group 6 consisted of 66th graders, none of whom had any athletic talent whatsoever. So this was a classic case of parents signing their kids up for camps. The kids can't really play football that well. It's a good time for the kids. It's a vacation for the parents. They stayed on campus for 3 days. I loved it. So I noticed that it was the first time in my life that I did not have to set my alarm clock to get up. And I decided I wanted to be a coach. Fly back to Boston, call my parents. Mom and Dad, I want to be a coach. My mom's like, oh, so this is kind of how you can fulfill your pro bono hours. It doesn't have to be legal. I'm like, no. I was like, listen, here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to graduate, but I'm also going to write a letter to every team in the NFL to get an internship, seek an internship. My dad said, look, you do realize that your name is on the loans. Okay. So the Bank of America educational loans, Daron Roberts, no cosigner. I was like, yeah, I get it. So he prayed for me on the phone and we hung up and that was it. So I go into my 3L year. I write a letter to every team in the NFL. There are 32 of them. 31 rejections roll in. Bill Belichick, no. Bill Parcells, no. Wade Phillips, no. John Fox, no. Finally, a yes from Herm Edwards. Herm Edwards at the time was the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. He calls me and he says, listen, I don't know what's wrong with you. I've got a gig for you though. You'll be a training camp intern. No pay, no benefits, 18-hour days. So, okay. Said, sign me up. So let me back up. At the point at which I decided I wanted to go into coaching, I'm a firm believer in burning the ships, burning the bridges, whatever metaphor you like to use, right? Once you get to the point of no return. So I immediately, before I sent one letter, called up the hiring partners for the firms that I had clerked at and politely declined the offer. And I won't mention the firm names, but I had 2 different responses. One partner immediately says to me, oh, wow, did we do something wrong? Like, what happened this summer? I was like, oh, listen, it was kind of one of those odd, sort of a relationship, like a relationship. I said, look, it's not me. It's not you. It's me. I worked a football camp. He's like, well, was there some bad experience you had here? I was like, no. I actually fairly enjoyed my time that summer at the firms, right? I mean, they build clerkships for enjoyment. So I was like, it was actually okay. I said, but I just really loved coaching. And so he could not understand it. And we ended the conversation. Another hiring partner, his first words are, that's fascinating. Tell me more. So we talked through the experience. He's like, look, I think that's great. Let's become friends. And so we're actually still friends to this day, still at the same firm. I think it's 2 very interesting reactions, right? One person was clearly invested in me as sort of a number in the next class. The other individual was invested in me as a human and what fulfilled me. And so I'll just say this. I think we constantly have to take a diagnosis of the people within our circle and and make an assessment as to which camp they fall into. I graduate. Let me back up. You'll hear me say that a lot. I take a professional responsibility class from David Wilkins. It's April of 2007. It's a small class, there are 30 of us, and he says, let's go around the table and everyone can tell the class where they're going after graduation. So we start off, and right off the bat, someone's clerking for Scalia. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good, right? We got, the typical firms, insert names here. Someone's working, State Department, insert circuit here. And then it gets to me, and I said, I'm going to be a training camp intern with the Kansas City Chiefs. The woman immediately to my left, it was like a long table. She says, can you translate that? Like, what did you just say? And so I went into this whole spiel of what training camp was, what I was doing. Of 31 people in the room, including myself and the professor, there were only 2 of us who were supportive. It was me and the professor, David Wilkins. And I remember after class, we sat down and he said, 550 of you walk into each class. And the majority of you, he said, it would be very interesting. I think every 3L student should be forced to go back and read their personal statement. Because everyone comes in and they write something around human rights, immigration, saving trees, babies, dolphins, you name it. And then they get here and he's like, a bit of it probably can be attributed to the collusion between law schools and law firms, right? Let's set the price high enough to where these folks have to come and work for us. And I'm not disparaging large law firms, right? I'm just saying that's the reality. And he said, but there are very few people who kind of do this random, strange thing that you're doing. He's like, I'm your friend for life. And again, still friends to this day. When you find people like this, and this is what I'll say, when you venture off the typical track, this is when your true allies show up. So it's easy while you're kind of, clicking the boxes and everything seems like it's rote and you're on the linear path. It's easy for people to cheer you on because they can wrap their minds around it. I've always found that the detours are very convenient filters in that the family members and the friends, and I'm going to, air quotes around friends, those people who are truly in your corner. And by corner, I mean, their main objective is to ensure that you're chasing happiness. Those people percolate to the surface and others fall to the wayside. I graduate, I walk across stage. Elena Kagan hands my degree to me. I walk off stage, hug my parents, we stay the night, and I drive from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Kansas City, Missouri in a 2002 Tahoe, which sits out in my garage at this moment. So I'm the grunt. So if the offensive lineman needed barbecue sandwiches, I was the guy that got the call, go down Kansas City, pick up 40 barbecue sandwiches. If the defensive lineman wanted Skoal, and I know this is a very refined crowd, Skoal is chewing tobacco, I would go to every Exxon, Texaco, Chevron, Shell, 7-Eleven, you name it, and I would get boxes of chewing tobacco for them. I slept in Arrowhead Stadium for 6 months because the head football coach, Herm Edwards, like clockwork, would walk through the front door at 5 a.m. And I determined the only way that I had a chance of getting a full-time gig was for him to see my face every day. All right. So this goes on for 6 months. We went 4-12. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that's not a good record. There's something called Black Monday in the NFL. This is when people get fired. It's the Monday after the last game of the season. The head coach fires 4 people. His secretary comes to my office, which was a converted closet. We had torn we had torn the door off the hinges. And so this is my office, and she comes in and she says, Daron, Coach Edwards would like to see you. I'm like, oh, right. I'm walking to his office, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, technically I can't get fired, right? So during the course of this 6-month escapade with the Chiefs, I had not signed a single piece of paperwork. I was nowhere on the website. It's like a black ops mission, right? It's like I'd been contracted out for nothing, and I feared that no one would no one would recognize if I was missing. But I walk into his office, and the head coach says to me, you know, Daron, I really appreciate all of your contributions. All right, so I've taken enough, at that time I had taken enough management courses to understand that proper firings are usually preceded by a compliment. This is the launch pad when people fire other people the right way. I was like, damn it. And then he says, look, I had to fire 4 people today. I said, yes, sir, I understand. And I'm looking down, and he slides a packet of paper. It was an 18-page document. And it was my first coaching contract. He said, hey, look, that's your first NFL coaching contract. I said, thank you. I turned to page 18. I took out my my Pilot V5 Precise pen, the only pen I use in life. And I scribbled my name across the line. He said, hold on. He said, now it's my understanding that first-year law students learn contract law. Is that still a part of the curriculum? And I said, yes, sir. He said, son, I just handed an 18-page employment contract to you. Save for your name, you have not read a single clause. I said, Coach, I understand. I said, you know, Coach, the one thing I know is that I have 0 leverage. Okay, so there wasn't a clause in that contract, whether it was the number of Super Bowl tickets I was to receive or compensation, 0 leverage, right? So I said, I just want to get back to work. So I signed it, gave it to him, and I was on my way. I think there's another key takeaway there. You know, people ask me would I do it all over again given where I've ended up, and I say absolutely. And they specifically ask about law school, and I said, look, the thing I love about law school is that there's this analytical framework you learn. There's a critical thinking that you're exposed to, and you unpack problems in a very methodical way. And I use that skill set to coach and to develop strategy in football. I say, but there's also a couple of, I think, negative byproducts to law school. One of them is I think it can also create a very regimented style of thinking that when transferred to our personal lives can lead to professional paralysis, can lead to life atrophy in a way, because we will turn over opportunities ad nauseum. It's like we've got this infinite Rubik's Cube because that's what we do as lawyers, right? What's the counter argument? What's the case law say? Right? But there are some moments in life, rare moments, when you feel it, you have to go. I'm not saying to be impetuous, but I think that you know in your gut when it's right to make a move, and it's hard to maintain that fidelity to your gut on the other side of law school. A quick thing I'll also say is I think law school, while it's great for analytical writing, I think it sucks the good writing out of our bone marrow. Like it's as if, because it's regimented, right? There's a structure involved. And for those of us, I'll say this, the thing I enjoy the most, there are 3 functions that light me up, and it's taken me 41 years to understand them: writing, speaking, and teaching. With writing, I've written one book. I'm done with the second one. I'm fighting with the publisher on a third one. I know that writing is the thing that I do. It's like it's ecstasy and it's agony, not the drug, but just ecstasy, kind of the notion of this thing, right? It's like the best and the worst of life. It feels so great to get the perfect sentence to convey this thought, right? To pick this combination from an infinite set of words and to find this sentence that really encapsulates what you're trying to say, but it's agony to get there. I think creative writing takes a hit if you're a person of that persuasion. Law school will do all that it can to rip creative writing out of your soul. And so if you don't like creative writing, cool, be on your way. If you do, it takes like there's a reclamation kind of process that has to occur post law school to get back to creative writing. But I digress. So 2 years with the Chiefs, 2 years with the Detroit Lions, 2 years with the West Virginia Mountaineers. Last year with the Cleveland Browns, we were all fired. We went 4-12. I went home, realized that my 3-year-old, I walk in and I start scrambling eggs and he says, "You eat breakfast?" And so I ignore the kid. I just been fired that morning. So I just ignore the kid and I keep going on. And then he turns to me and says, "No, you eat breakfast." And I turn to my wife and I'm like, "What is he talking about?" And my wife says, "Well, when was the last time you had breakfast with Dylan?" And this was like a gunshot to the soul. I said, "Whoa." I realized I was still sleeping at the office 2 nights a week. I would get up and go to work at 4 a.m. The irony slapped me in the face in that I was spending all of my time with other people's sons and my own son didn't know me. So just like the moment when I knew I had to go into coaching, how it was crystal clear, it was also crystal clear for me that I needed to get out of coaching. So we pack up a U-Haul, come to Austin at the University of Texas. I came here on a 1-year sabbatical. Side note, if you ever take a sabbatical from anything, the proper equation is 5x. So X being what you think, the amount of time you think you're going to take, it's going to probably 5x that, right? So I'm like, oh, I'll go back to Austin for a year, teach at UT. The next thing you know, I'm in a meeting with the president around sports leadership. This was around the Ray Rice episode that many of you will remember, in which sort of this a very tardy emphasis was placed on the NFL around domestic violence and assault and leadership, right? This is an issue that the league has known that it's had for a while. And so the president casually asked me, "Hey, if you could create something around leadership and sports, what would it look like?" So I think he made it as an offhand remark. Taking my legal sort of background, I immediately went home, spent 2 weeks putting together a white paper, and I said, "Hey, this is the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation. This is what it will do. We'll teach financial literacy and leadership to our athletes here at UT in a classroom. It should be in your office. It shouldn't be in athletics because there needs to be some separation between the two. We're going to work with our former pro athletes to help them transition." He's like, "Great. You're going to run it." And I said, "No, I'm on sabbatical and I'm just here for a year." He's like, "No, you're going to run it." So a month later, we had a press conference and we were up and going. And 6 years later, here we are. I'm going to talk about staying in the deep end from a leadership perspective. I got a few points. And then I want to open this up for Q&A. Point number 1, really, these are just things I think you should practice. Radical grace, radical grace, radical grace, radical grace. If there is one blatant takeaway that the post-Floyd world gives to me on a daily basis, is that humans are very bad at practicing radical grace. And this is why I think it is the case, because, from a psychological standpoint, we are built, our minds are built to enable us to survive. Homeostasis is the goal, right? Never overexertion from a physical standpoint, and even from a mental standpoint. So if the research shows that if you don't force yourself over the trajectory of your life to learn new things, the synapses between and the neurons in your brain, they will stop growing. So there's no impetus within the brain to learn new things. You have to intentionally do this. And the brain also loves the binary code. So the brain loves a 0-1 system. So the brain, when we see things and hear things, the brain wants to very conveniently classify those experiences and thoughts and words into a mental cubicle and then move on to the next challenge. This is good for survival. It's bad for thriving. And I think what we're seeing is that we've lost the ability, and maybe we never had it in mass. We've lost the ability to practice radical grace. And what I mean by radical grace is this: taking people at face value, approaching relationships with a blank slate, allowing people to show us who they are. This is to be differentiated between forgiveness. I'm not talking about forgiveness here, because this is what I'll give you. The great philosopher Thelma Roberts, my grandmother, would always say, once a person shows you who they are, believe them. I'm 41. We only have so much time on the planet. When people show us that they do not want to change, that they are very comfortable in their willful ignorance, we have to make the decision whether or not we want to protect our own energy and move on, or labor there. And nowhere else is this dilemma more apparent than a Facebook news feed. Just climb into the comment section, and you'll have people, back and forth, and it's like this jousting match. And I'll say, listen, it's evident to me she doesn't want to change, right? It's different from people who say, look, I want to learn more. I just got off of a book club that I've been hosting on Instagram Live. It was the last session of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And, Baldwin, in the last 2 pages, very clearly states that there is a decision between Americans deciding to take on this task and destruction. That's where the fire next time comes from. This line in the Negro spiritual. And it's like, listen, the first time was the flood, but the next time will be fire. And he says that fire next time will be as a result of Americans not taking on this challenge. So radical grace, practice radical grace. Number 2, strive for active listening. Okay, listening. Humans we think we're really good at it, and they've done studies. And one study I love is you bring people into the lab and you say, hey, what do you think from a percentage standpoint? How well do you listen? We will rate ourselves around 92 to 93%. Oh, when people are talking, I get about 92 to 93%. I'm like, all right, cool. Then they hand 2 people scripts, and you sit across from each other and you read your script. Okay. And then they give each one test. And do you know where we're scoring as humans on average? About 42%. So we're hearing, and hearing is a lower bar, right, to listening. We are hearing at 42%. And my theory is that we are not intentionally pushing against the mental chatter. So one thing I'm going to say here is that I think it's vitally important for us to wiretap our mental chatter. So as people are talking to us, we have to be intentional about asking ourselves, what is my brain saying to me? Because here's what the brain does. Stimuli. The brain instantly tries to categorize what we see or hear, and it looks for comps. So it goes back through our mental Rolodex and says, oh, that's just like the situation back from third grade. This is not good for listening, because during that span of time, we are missing words. So I have a mental pause button when someone's sharing something with me. Regardless of how much I think I know, I mentally see my finger pressing the pause button, which means Zoom sessions, Google Calendar, what I'm going to make for the kids after this Zoom call for lunch. Like, I constantly put that on hold so that I can really tune into what I'm hearing. And then I think we have to adopt a vernacular that will help us to fill the gaps. For example, when you said this, I heard this. Is that what you meant? Let the person fill in the gaps. What I understand from what you said was this. I really hope that you could fill in this for me, right? So we're trying to get more and more information. Oftentimes we expedite our listening because we're thinking about the next entry on the calendar, right? So active listening from a leadership perspective, vitally important. The last thing I'm going to say is this around leadership, and this is just personal as well. I talk about staying in the deep end. Please, for the love of all that is right with the world and for the livelihood of your souls, constantly take the temperature on your happiness and fulfillment. Like, don't sort of hit the shortcut, well, I got to do this for X number of years because I got this goal. I went back for my law school reunion, my 10-year reunion, and every one of my buddies, men, women, boys, and girls from all across the world, all of them who said, I'm just doing 4 years, I'm paying off loans, I'm going to live below my means, and then I'm out to go write screenplays and start a cooking school. None of it happened. And so we're commiserating over bourbon, and they're like, you know, Daron, and look, let me back up. First of all, the world needs good lawyers. So please don't interpret anything that I'm saying to you as like me trying to convince you to not go into law. If the events of the last 4 years have reminded me that if there is one of the essential workers that we need to highlight are attorneys and lawyers with compassion and empathy and grace and understanding. God knows if you fall into that category, we need you. For those of you who have sort of misgivings about what the next stages will be because there may be this other thing that you kind of like, just stay in the deep end. I'm not saying you have to go full force like I did, but if you go practice, find some way to cultivate. You know, I had a buddy who in law school was a section mate of mine. Like, he would bring us over out of his dorm room. He would cook up these crazy meals. We're like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, he just loved cooking. He's like, I want to start a cooking school. And he's like, I'm going to go for 3 years and I'm going to do it. And he still talks about that. And it's not a 0-1 game. Like, either graduate and go to culinary school or go practice. But I do think there's a way to marry both to where you cultivate this side, not necessarily a hustle, but this side love. And at some point you watch it grow, and then you can then make the decision, maybe I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I'm done talking. Is anyone brave enough to unmute? We've got two great people here. You know, you two at the top, Floyd and Dorothy. I love you. And you, of course, Eric. You, of course, Eric.
Yeah, well, I know that both of those students would love to ask a question since they already have another one. So take it away. Which one of you wants to go first? And by the way, for those of you that want to ask questions, you can queue them up in the chat box or just unmute yourself when you're ready to speak. So go ahead.
Certainly. Thank you, Director Hinton. I have a question about some of the challenges that you faced caused by others' perceptions of you. So it seems like in that room of 30 people, there were individuals that wanted to keep you in that box of being a lawyer. And then potentially when you left coaching, there might have been people that wanted to keep you in that box of being a coach. So how did you handle the mental battle against yourself to say, no, that's not me, and keep fighting the good fight to achieve the dream and the goal that you needed?
Great question, Floyd. I think something I don't know how I arrived at this point in my life. I think early on I realized most people don't even like their own lives. So I wasn't going to invest too much time on their assessment of mine. Like most of the people I knew were genuinely unhappy with their lives. And so I'm like, I guess I thought to myself, what does this person, like they weren't with me at the camp. Like I've always just said that, you know what, my gut's gonna trump 99% of the input that I get from other people, right? And I get this question a lot, and it was, maybe it's the way I was raised. My mom and dad, they really cultivated in me like this appetite for risk taking. They also forced me to rethink the reason why, like why was I going to certain schools, like, and they would flip the narrative. Like you go, one reason why we go to schools is that we have the flexibility to do things that may be more confining for those who don't. But the problem is we then go through these schools and then we imprison ourselves back into this very binary, like, here's the small subset of things I can do, which education is meant to liberate us and give us more options. And then I always think to myself, from the day I was born until the day I die, the one constant that I can point to is that I will always go to bed with myself, right? Like, wonderful wife, my mom is incredible, but life in many ways is a solitary journey. And it goes back to an earlier point. I think those detours are really natural filters for us to determine who we can rely on, not for just blind support, but for people who just really want us to keep chasing whatever our version of happiness may be. That's the question.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, did you come across a lot of people that were just strangely irritated with your success and level of ambition, that you just didn't understand why they had an issue with you trying so hard?
Yeah, and I think I'm like, man, people have a lot of issues. Like, and this is one thing that my dad would always say, don't solve a problem that you don't have. And so I think oftentimes we adopt problems. So, for example, my uncle, I have 20 uncles and aunts. One of my uncles had a real issue with me not practicing law because I was going to become the first attorney in my family. And he would let me know this at reunions and holidays, you name it, via email. And at some point I thought to myself, let me give him a fake name. I was like, how many times do I see Uncle Ted? Like 4 times a year. Does it matter what he thinks? I'm like, I don't know, right? I'm like, he's disappointed, but such is life, right? Like, I think this is the last thing I'll say. The one person I don't want to disappoint is myself. I think that's where I am in life. The older I get, the more I hold on to that. Is like for me, the severest form of pain is regret And I've been in this situation where I've looked back and I said, oh, I should have done that thing, not because it would have equated into more money or more experiences, but that was an experience like that I really should have taken. And the only reason why I didn't, like the worst decisions I've made is because I took sort of a mental poll of what people thought around me and then based my decision on that. It's tough. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but I think COVID has also been a crucible for that, right? Like COVID has boiled away all of the pretense. And I'll say this, like if our pre-COVID lives look like our post-COVID lives the same way, like we're doing something wrong. So good question.
Roberts.
Thank you.
Coach Roberts, my name is Dorothy Lukens, and it's so strange. I'm really glad that you're speaking today. I've been following your Stay in the Deep End posts on LinkedIn for a long time. So when I saw you were speaking, I thought, well, I definitely have to be on the call today.
Thank you.
And I've been inspired by your micro wins, especially how you include your family in your micro win posts. I have a family too, and trying to balance going back to law school, being a non-traditional student. My time with my kids were kind of getting away from me. And so I just want to say thank you, because you flipped that for me, and now they're on my micro wins every day. And so
Are you serious?
Yeah. Like walk with my kids today is a micro wins. And so things like that, I was just taking for granted. But when you were talking about taking a pulse of your happiness, like I really enjoy working, being busy. I love going to law school. I don't see myself ever coming back from that challenge, that type of environment. But I definitely don't want my family to fall by the wayside and all of that. And so I've been struggling to figure out how to incorporate them into my daily routine. And then I saw that you were posting those things, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Put them on my to-do list. Like, it's so simple, but it's just something I didn't think about. So thank you.
No, first, thank you for that. Really kind words. And I'll just say on micro wins, I think at some point early on, probably right after undergrad, I just realized I was really bad at big goals, right? Like, and this is borne out from some of the research. So New Year's resolutions by February the 2nd, 80% of them are either forgotten or broken. So people are like, you come out of the gates, you're fresh off of the champagne from New Year's Eve. You come out like, this is what I'm going to do. They're these big lofty goals. And then they never really get broken down into mini steps. And I think because my wife and I have 5 kids, like things have to be small for my mind. Like all of my phone conversations, my default in Google Calendar is 20 minutes. It's not 30 minutes. I limit myself in terms of my time increments, because I'm trying to preserve as many minutes as I possibly can in the aggregate so that I can give of myself to my family. And micro wins just helps me. Like today, the micro win for family is to, we're going to show them Forrest Gump. So we're doing this whole like old movies that our kids have never heard of and kind of get their reactions. So we're going to do like part 1 of Forrest Gump tonight. But like that forces me to engineer my day. So that's the bare minimum. Right. And so I appreciate it. It's been interesting to kind of see how people have reacted to it, because I just posted it, not really thinking much about it. And so thank you, Dorothy. And congrats on all that you're doing and coming back for law school and juggling family. That's incredible. So
thanks. And we definitely stole your backyard tent idea. When I saw my kids were like, we are so doing that. So
yeah, my kids are nuts because last night they're like, hey, can we break out the backyard tent? I said, look, that was a March, February, early April thing. It's 108. It hit 108 in Austin yesterday. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to see this thing until October, but we got pictures and video. But so I'm glad you got it in while the weather was good.
We did.
Good.
Thank you, Dorothy, and glad you have fans. I'm sure there's some others, and I would encourage all of you to follow Daron and keep him accountable for his micro wins each day. And I will add, from my experience, he's very honest when he doesn't succeed to get the micro win, and I respect that. We have a couple questions from the chat, Daron. First of all, this is actually from Arma, who had to return to study for the bar, but we will ask the question because I think it's a great one, and she can hear your answer later. But she wants you to elaborate a little more on what radical grace is. And then I'm going to add another one that we have from Isabel, which would say, what would be the best way to process or check the temperature of your happiness?
Yes. Okay. One is radical grace, and then happiness temp. So for the first question, if you're watching this in the future, good luck with your bar studying. I forgot it was July, man. So for those of you who are on here and taking it, that's a lot of dedication. So radical grace, I don't have a great definition for it. I'm going to describe it, and I'm going to tell you that I don't have, there are a lot of definitions you'll find if you Google it. I haven't found one that suited me, but I just want to describe what it feels like for me. So for me, radical grace is approaching new relationships from a standpoint of a blank mental slate. So, and this requires some knowledge of your, if you haven't taken the implicit association test, the IAT, to really, in a very methodical way, identify your subconscious biases, you should do that. But I know my biases, and so I understand that, and this could be religion, gender, weight, geographical identity, I mean, you name it. Radical grace attempts to impede our minds from making rash conclusions about people, and we want to allow the bridge of active listening to take us to who a person is. So I just meet you, you know what? You may look a certain way and talk a certain way. I'm going to tell my mind not to try to associate you, because here's what the mind does. They say, oh, 6'4", white male, preppy. The mind starts to go back through our catalog, and then we pull the closest association. And based on what that experience was, we could be sizing this person up in a certain way, and they could be, they are different humans than what we've been exposed to. So radical grace says, I'm going to give you this open blank slate. I'm going to allow you to show me who you are. Not to be, again, confused with forgiveness. It doesn't mean that I'm going to absolve you of all of your previous, current, and future sins. That's not what I'm saying. I think that's a different element. But I'm just going to allow you to show me who you are. And then once I make an assessment based on multiple experiences of this is the kind of person you are, I'm going to choose how I want our relationship to evolve or not. So that's radical grace. And also just the assumption, we should start from the assumption that people, I know it's difficult in 2020, that people are operating from a genuine base. I want to believe that people are good before they show me they're not. Now I'm from East Texas, so I can make an assessment. Like, one thing I'll say, one of the beauties for me as a Black male in East Texas was that people were very clear as to how they felt about race in East Texas. My parents brought me up in a home to where, I've had a lot of friends of mine come to me and say, post Floyd, we never talked about race in our family. And I said, well, that's a privilege. Like my dad was having conversations with me at the age of 5 before I could drive about putting my hands up at 10 and 12 or 10 and 2. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Not keeping my not keeping my registration and proof of insurance in the glove compartment, always having it above, signaling to the cop asking for permission to reach. Like I was 5, I can still remember those. I was like, what in the heck is this man talking about? I don't even have a BMX bike yet. Like, what's this man? But he considered it a form of parental malpractice to not begin to have those conversations with me early. So I think it's important that we take where people are right now and then allow them to tell us kind of who they are. Show us who they are. Show, not tell, show. Sorry, show. Actions. On the happiness question, how do you take a temperature? So I'm a fan of waking up early in the morning. Now, this is not going to be like the case for why you should wake up early. The reason why I mention it though is that with my wife and I having 5 kids, the earliest kid, Jackson Roberts, wakes up on the dot. I don't care if he goes to bed at midnight or 8 p.m., 6:30 a.m., he's up and ready to go. That means that the earliest human in my home is up at 6:30. And I wake up at 4:36. I need that hour and a half, or you do the math, less than 2 hours, just under 2 hours. I need that time to set the intention for the day, to read my Bible, to write, to breathe. Like these are the things that I do in this closet that you're seeing every single morning before my kids get up, because it's my only quiet time. For some of you, it may be midnight. But I also, at the end of every day, at the bottom of my Google Calendar, you'll see an entry for 11 p.m. I write a number from 1 to 10 of what was that day like for me. So how much did I enjoy that day? And then I aggregate those numbers and look at them. And when I start hitting a lot of 5s and 6s, I look back at the day and I think, what was it? Did I write enough? Were there too many Zooms? Did I not leave enough time in between engagements? So like, I think we have to be methodical about it. And I always tell people, like for me, if it's not in Excel, it doesn't exist. Like I think that oftentimes we kind of leave these things like happiness and joy, they become these ephemeral sort of things out on the horizon, which is one reason why I have micro wins. Like I want to see it inside of a cell, because I just find, and you heard this adage, like what I measure, I spend time trying to correct and improve upon. If it's fuzzy for me, like, oh, I want to write a book, I'd never say I want to write a book. I say, tomorrow, I'm going to come up with the title of a book. The next day, I'm going to write the title of 2 chapter titles. Day 3, I'm going to write 3 more chapter titles, so that I'm trying to create building blocks to get to this massive goal, because I've just found that I tend to, big goals don't work for me. And I think they don't work for most humans. So.
That's great. Thank you. We're near the end of our time. Do you have more time for questions, or
Yeah, we'll take some more questions. Yeah.
I actually have one, and then we'll open it up to others. So I know that we're both fans of Brene Brown, and I know you had the opportunity to interview her, I think, last year. Mm-hmm. And as you know, one of her big conversation pieces is, well, there's 2. There's shame, and then there's vulnerability. I mean, how do you, not to go through all of that, that's a wonderful topic for another time, but how do you kind of work that into your philosophy and your approach, and especially when it comes to, you know, radical grace and active listening, and then taking your temperature?
Yeah. So every class that I teach, if you looked at, I teach on rotation, I teach 5 different classes at the University of Texas. Every class that I teach begins with vulnerability and shame, Brene Brown. So we talk about empathy. Hold on one second.
I take it that's Jackson.
That's Jackson. So I'll answer this last question, then I'll come out. I start with Brene Brown, vulnerability, shame, empathy, dare to lead. This is like mandatory reading. And what I'll say is that the common association with vulnerability has been the word weakness. The research shows that teams led by people who are vulnerable, they believe in their leaders more, all the metrics matter. So I think starting with Dare to Lead and really embracing vulnerability as a strength versus a weakness is a proper starting point. I'm sorry I have to go. I enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate you taking time with us. I encourage people to go out and put the link for Coach Roberts in the chat, so you can definitely follow him on social media and probably order his books and look for the next one. And hey, when you run for governor, we'll be there to support. So thanks so much, and have a good day. Thank you, everyone else, and we'll speak to you again on Friday.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.